an association for arts and media based in Brussels since '97. We're a group of a multidisciplinary group of artists, designers, people in the cultural field, and our work is placed at the intersection of FLOSS, feminism, and the thinking about authorship. In the past, we've worked a lot on alternatives for author rights in digital media, because the whole field of digital media asks very specific approach of authorship. For the moment, we are very interested in thinking in connections to societal developments and how artistic practice is intertwined with more political aspects of life. And that's where we also see a potential for the licenses or maybe other types of documents to play a role in. Our work is very much based in collective work, so most of the things that we do is aimed at researching artistic practice from the inside out, so from the perspective of people who are actually creating culture, but not shutting their eyes for possible other ways of doing. So our work on technology is critical of certain aspects of technology and very enthusiastic about other aspects of technology. And so this critical approach also needs to be translated in ways of doing and ways of assembling one's practice. And this is something where, let's say, it's not a theoretical thing, but it's inspired by theory. So I mentioned feminism. Feminism as a theoretical branch is super important for us, where also the interconnection with, let's say, biology, for example, and other strands of life are coming into play. So practice is definitely on the, let's say, the program of what we research from the inside. And what you see here in the images that Constant Slideware is producing are some examples which we will not go into, but it gives an idea of the diversity of work that we are involved in. So we do exhibitions, we produce books, we have, many of us are coming from a graphic design background, but the main thing that we organize is what we call work sessions. These are gatherings of artists and people around the arts who are scrutinizing a specific aspect, a question which is important. That can be, I mean, this image is a very old image, but it was about wireless technologies. Something that we are really interested in for the moment and for the future is to think about protocols, technological protocols for connecting, but in connection to the question of, let's say, how to democratize technology. So that has been on, this is a beautiful image, by the way, has been on the program for a long time. So, and in relation to licenses, what is important for us is also the freedoms that are that are connected to free open content licenses. So the freedom to use, to study, to make, and to reproduce, redistribute work that comes under an open content license have been very important for thinking of the processes of work, like how do you work as collective in collective processes, and how do you share or co-experience and dive collectively into producing knowledge and producing art.
So just if you're wondering what you're looking at, part of the ongoing experiments is to somehow avoid anything that would represent a final cut. So we're interested in types of presentations that are maybe not finished. So we're using a homebrew script that allows us to launch different softwares. So we're really interested in showing all the mistakes, all the failures, but still being able to show you things. And also the different software processes that are running in the background. So not to go full screen, not to cut off these edges. And so this is what we call promiscuous slideware. There's one caveat in this slideware is that we cannot go back. So right. If all is well, Piksel has shared the link to a page with the full script that we are currently running. So, authors of the future, reimagining copyleft. Like Peter has been explaining in introducing Constant, the use of free licenses has been important for many aspects. We have been working with these licenses since 1999-2000s, and since then all our work has been released under usually free art licenses. So everything that is produced in the context of Constant. And also we have been trying to work with free software as much as we could. Of course, we can never escape the Gmail addresses that people, for example, bind us into. So for Constant, Copyleft has been most of all important as a kind of a way to practice and be committed to a collective, the collective work from this feminist idea of thinking that authorship is never starts from a tabula rasa, is a webbed practice, like really deeply. But the last years, slowly we have started to see some of the problems with this choice, and without wanting to let go of the commitment, we realized that we had to reopen this box. So what you see here, and it's also used as the image for announcing this presentation, is a poster that was made 20 years ago. This was the first time Constant started to discuss publicly about the use of open content licenses. Last year we organized an event with several guests where we literally reopened the box of Copyleft to try and remember why we initially decided to commit to these practices, and how we could maybe understand what we are missing now, what has changed, and how to go about it.
So this is literally the box of the event copy cult and the original sin or sign between brackets, G between brackets, which we dug up and we reopened for the occasion of 20 years after the first use of the open content licenses in Constant.
So one of the things that was important was to remember, because like if you see that dusty box, also licenses themselves are somehow a sort of gray literature that you usually you click OK when you have to have installed something. You don't really want to go into this. It's a practice that legal scholars love, but what do artists actually have to do with it? And on this event, Authors of the Future, our friend and colleague Émeric Mansou reminded us that this is not licenses. Free art licenses are not just, let's say, documents attached to static objects or art objects. They're very much a political practice. They are somehow, and he called this an ideological interface to somehow re-articulate and reframe the way you want your work to exist in the world. And so this political aspect is really important to remember, and also to remember how something as dull and unexciting as a license can actually be a catalyst of a political process. So, I mean, I think also part of the work was to somehow get re-excited again about licenses, because after 20 years of going around with them, we had somehow thought that we had seen all its corners. But when we wanted to think again, like when we wanted to try and deal with the critique that we were slowly building, we also needed to have some excitement about what licenses actually do. So I refer to some of the problems that we started to see. Part of those problems appeared because after 20 years, we also could better see the implications of using these licenses. And for example, what in the 2000s was absolutely unimaginable, the fact that platform capitalists were very eager to support and take advantage of content in the public domain or under a free license is something that we have to somehow come to terms with right now. Another thing that is difficult to see is how in our imagination of free culture as a feminist practice that would somehow allow us to understand authorship in a different way, so not as something that is individual, not something that starts with the human, something that is entangled, like really entangled. We realized that the fact that free licenses are bound to traditional copyright means that it's always going back to the individual authorship. So actually what we thought would be easy or easier, like the sharing would be maybe easier to do, but it would always go through individual authorship, and come back to that. And then the third thing, that is something I think that we have somehow started with, we started to see that we needed to work harder to make sure that these, to make sure that we were somehow working with these documents as in the relation between authorship practice and social practice. So what we start to see is something we also that also is reflected in how we, for example, see free software moving right now, or free software that we are interested in. We can see that it's not just about the license for the object, the digital object. It's also about the kind of framing of a practice. That sounds very abstract, but what I'm trying to say is what we started to do first, before we actually reopened the box of Copyleft, was to formulate in constant terms, it's called collaboration guidelines. In other environments, this would mean maybe a code of conduct, a document in which we formulate as clearly as we can how we want to be together and how we want to work together, and also where the limits are to what we find acceptable. So last year, somehow in parallel to this work on authorship licenses, we started writing these collaboration guidelines. And one of the things that was very important for us to understand is that such a document cannot be a static document. So the process that we have committed to, again, it's a commitment, is to update these guidelines every half year. This updating is connected to the work sessions that Peter just briefly introduced, these half-yearly research sessions that we organize. And so for each new session, we will update these guidelines and then test and discuss with the group that comes together. Because of course it's also a question of who we are working with, and it's a situated document. It's somehow related to things we actually do.
Yeah, so it's community guidelines basically, and we can't go back in this script. This is a fantastic slideware, but as Femke said, the only bug is that we can only go forward. So just to say that the two previous images, So what you see here is an Etherpad, a collective writing page, where the current document that we use as a collaboration guideline is at. Which is already collaboratively written, but it's also open for interventions. So we collect advice and questions on these guidelines on Notepad. And once every 6 months, we transfer it into the guidelines. But the two previous images were images of a printout of the short version of these guidelines, because there are two versions, a short one, as short as possible, and a long one, which we don't shy away from, where we don't shy away from long text. But we made a printout and we printed it on a chalkboard in front of our office, so that interventions could also be chalked up on the facade of our window. And it's important because it's a big question. Like Constant functions more as a hub, I would say, or a connection point. So we make connections between different types of communities. And certainly one of the communities that we are in touch with is the neighborhood that we are in. But that's not necessarily the people who come to events that we organize with professional artists or with curators, or which is much more, it's kind of, let's say, in-depth meeting, but not very accessible. So we try to open the guidelines up to different, let's say, groups around us to scrutinize and see if we can come up with ideas of how to proceed with these guidelines.
Thank you. Yeah, good to say what we were looking at. So I've just highlighted the part in the collaboration guidelines where you see the direct connection between our work with free culture and the community guidelines. And you can really, it's so obvious that it's almost difficult to explain, but we only in the last years we started to see how we could maybe do this. So in the collaboration guidelines, obviously there is a reference to the preferred license we like to use, and then now we have opened up the rewriting of a license, but we will talk about that in a Piksel of next year. Huh?
Ah, okay.
That's really in progress. Right.
Yeah. So these writing about community and writing about ways of working together is somehow not channeled fluently to the writing of licenses. And so for the event that took place last year, we collected a few licenses that were inspiration. And we noticed that they are actually licenses that go much further than describing the use of an object, but they are opening up the spectrum of the ecology around it, around how the thinking about what is licensed came about, and that's much more a political standpoint than usually how we usually think of licenses. And it's also going back to the early history of licenses, where you could say that you write up something in which the traces of community and the traces of the process of in which something is produced is much more visible than the current licenses that we know, which are mostly aimed at, let's say, or they're at least formulated on a perspective of culture or the position of a maker as somebody who has the property rights on a intellectual thing. So intellectual property rights are already a doubtful phenomenon.
And just to say, like the licenses that Peter is going to just quickly go through, we started to use
already a doubtful phenomenon.
And just to say, like the licenses that Peter is going to just quickly go through, we started to use them as a kind of thinking device. So they're not necessarily licenses we would like to copy from or we would like to use, but they just helped us understand the different things at stake and to see the tensions and the paradoxes that are there in the way free licenses operate.
Yeah, and one of the tensions immediately is that they are all have a difficult relationship with the, let's say, the official open source definition, which excludes licenses that limit reuse in a specific field of endeavor. And many of the licenses that we are now looking at are actually doing exactly this. So it also means that what we understand to be open source is in this way,
culture, yeah.
or free culture is in this way challenged, and we need to reopen.
So yeah, just to clarify, so where the free culture definition is very clear about not limiting use to a certain area, and somehow we have been also charmed by this idea of not trying to define beyond your own field of influence who can use your work for what. We see that somehow we need to think about these setting of conditions in a different way.
So we have a few examples that are also available in the exhibition, if I'm not mistaken. Normally they should be visible on a computer, and there might also be a print out PDF somewhere in the room. I don't know. I hope so. I think so. So if you have access to that document, this is exactly the same. So we go through it quickly. One of the things that we like to not forget is that technology is based in one of the things that we like to not forget is that technology is based in a colonial history, and the decolonial media license prefers, let's say, people who are disprivileged because of that history above privileged people who come. Yeah. So the decolonial is an important aspect in what we are looking at. Then there is the non-white heterosexual male license, which distinguishes, so that's basically a proposition for public domain use for non-white heterosexual males. It also allows usage for white heterosexual males, but then the conditions are different. So there's a distinction that normally you would not make in, let's say, traditional open source licenses, but this is exactly the point here.
Yeah, so where the decolonial media license mainly tries to signal issues with the different types of access and the different types of privilege that are around in authorship and the entitlement that comes with it. It is more in the preamble and the way it's written. The non-white heterosexual male license makes that a direct practice by shifting the rights depending on the privilege of the user.
So it's also actively trying to rewrite the histories around production. Yeah, anyway, we won't go in too deeply, but that's one of the aspects that's very important to look at. Let's cut it short, yes.
So much to say about this place.
This our question was already, why did we put the French version? But this is the peer production license, which gives people who are in, our question was already, why did we put the French version? But this is the peer production license, which gives people who are in cooperative. Our question was already, why did we put the French version? But this is the peer production license, which gives people who are in cooperative production a right to use the object, but not enterprises who are benefiting commercially from collective work. Then Koji Spores is a free fermentation license, which was which came into existence around a project that we did with Constant, with Sarah Maninti. The project is called Wicked Technologies, Wild Fermentation, and it took place between March and May 2019. And the idea is to think further than human production. If we think about art and creation and what authorships exist, we tend to put the human in the center, but Koji Spores is actually thinking about the sharing and use of microorganisms, and that what is produced by fermentation as creative practice. So what do you do with a description? Who is the right owner in terms of creation, if we think about something else than the human? Then there's the climate strike license, which prohibits the use of code by applicants or applications or companies that endorse or benefit from fossil fuel extraction. So it's a again, it's a limitation on the use of code, but then based on a society, an image of a vision of society, which in Femke wanted to interrupt me, please do.
No, it's just that of course it's very questionable whether you can actually define what that would mean. Like you could say that any computational process is environmentally problematic. So it might mean that the software produced on that any computational process is environmentally problematic. So it might mean that the software produced under this license can never be used. You can even ask yourself if software production itself would be possible under the conditions of its own license. But what is really exciting to see is that each of these licenses puts the discussion and the thinking back on the map that we have had somehow lost a bit in a rote application of free culture licenses.
Oh, there's another one. There's the consumer dilemma license, which makes a distinction based on income. Like if you are more capable financially wise, how do you say that? Your finances are stronger or more than that of somebody else. It makes a distinction based on this. So again, these licenses are examples of documents in this case. That open a lot of discussions on what does it mean to be an author. How do you think authorship is embedded in a larger framework? Authorship as such is not limited. It makes connections to other parts of life which are equally important or even more important. And there is a impossibility of separating the two. So if you have to write a license, then it would actually be a good idea to write up these connections. So we are, well, let's speak for ourselves. We are not interested in thinking of artistic production as the creation of isolated objects. We are much more interested in thinking of artistic creation as being entangled with the whole world. No? And that's also a bit the discussion, like where do you place this license? Because usually they travel, as Femke showed in one of the slides, they travel with an object. So the object is distributed, the code is, and that's also a bit the discussion, like where do you place this license? Because usually they travel, as Femke showed in one of the slides, they travel with an object. So the object is distributed, the code is put out there. But that's also a big question mark, like should that writing not concern the community itself? And what is the distinction between that what you output, that what you are, and the modes of production? So that's an interesting field where we put a lot of question marks, and we're really interested in diving further into it in the future. So one of the things that you could think about, which are really problematic, but also interesting, is the field of the appropriation of traditional knowledge. Like how knowledge that is produced by indigenous cultures is connecting to other communities. So what you see here is a set of labels, the traditional that specify how traditional knowledges can be used or not by other communities. So there's, for example, one label which is called the TK Women General, the TKWG, which specifies that the type of knowledge that is labeled is traditionally, according to the community where it was produced, held within groups of women only. So that label is basically specifying that the knowledge is used for a community of women.
So again, like this is not something we would like to develop for Constant, but it really shows also the relation between authorship, privilege, identity, and then how could you somehow do this sensitively and without falling into the trap of control and closed boundaries.
Yeah.
Closed boundaries.
Yeah.
So this is our last example.
Yeah.
So this is our last example, no?
Yeah, we have to retune, like we go to a different frequency. So one of the things, so that's basically a large field that we're interested in, and we have different projects around it. And we connect to a group of cinema makers who is not a group. They are, let's say,
a collective
instances. It's a reforming and a reformatting and a growing and changing group of people around cinema who are themselves filmmakers, film lovers, and they are really interested in the question of authorship because they tend to not endorse copyrights or author rights in its claim of owning or in its property claim of images. So the films that they collect, and it's so the Festival Mondial de Cinéma Sauvage took place twice now, once in 2017 in Brussels and once in 2019. And both instances were made by different groups of makers. So it's not a coherent, let's say, organization. It's really a situated, a festival where people and places also come together. It's organized in squads. So yeah.
So maybe I can read the way they describe themselves, and you can see how they make the connection between the sort of the aims and the desires of the festival and the way this connects to authorship. So Cinémas Sauvage, cinemas, is an open place and an open moment crossed by opposing currents. It invites films and approaches that is an open place and an open moment crossed by opposing currents. It invites films and approaches that do not bother with the notions of property, an open place and an open moment crossed by opposing currents. It invites films and approaches that do not bother with the notions of property, copyright, or authorship. Do not bother, well, they do. Consciously sometimes via free licenses, naively often listening only to their energy. These films show themselves and divert themselves or distribute themselves without constraints, searching for their own, working on their media, engaging in collective adventures, questioning themselves politically. They pass from hand to hand.
So the way that after a lot of discussion in the first year, we have been talking about licenses in a very way, and we came up together with the idea to try to think about what would it mean to have a feral or wild license, and would such a thing be possible? So what we did last year, so in 2019, is to organize a get-together with many of the people in the festival. There were about, so it was a workshop basically in which we tried to do this, so to actively think together, what would it be like to start this. And that was a super interesting moment. We had like 35 filmmakers who all have a very different approach on what their practice is like, and they all have a very different idea of how they deal with other people's images, but also how they want their own products well, yeah, their own product is already a very debatable thing,
Yes.
but the films that they make or the films that they, yeah, sometimes collage or even steal, how they would put them in the world.
So maybe it's good to say like the two editions that have happened so far, in both cases.
How they would put them in the world.
So maybe it's good to say like the two editions that have happened.
How they would put them in the world.
So maybe it's good to say like the two editions that have happened so far, in both cases. All the films that were screened were also available on a hard drive, and everyone visiting the festival was invited to bring a hard drive and or like a USB stick and copy all the digital copies of the digital versions of the films. So this was like it was.
Really interesting because it's also a huge work. There are a few hundred films that are all of high quality, basically locally available. Bring your USB stick and you have. That's also the idea, to be able to make your own festival out of theirs, or to copy it completely, or to do something else with it. But yeah. The style of writing, so what you see here is basically the write-up of ideas as we brainstormed, right? So it's we put big sheets of paper on the table. Basically the write-up of ideas as we brainstormed, right? So it's we put big sheets of paper on the table and we brainstormed away. What does this all mean? No? Obviously, the main question is, how does feral and wild, how does it let itself be enclosed in a document, and does it want to be? And I mean, there is no conclusion because again, everybody has their own opinions, but that's a tricky thing, let's say. So the thing that we realized much later, that what you see here is actually much closer to the way that the ecology around Cinema Sauvage works than any formatted document we could make. Like, it's opinions that come together in a certain situation, but even the next situation, the whole thing will be different. So it's really an active writing that is based in the group of people that are at that moment together.
Yeah, so you can see like there's questions of distribution, there's questions of let's say where is the festival, there's questions of wanting to accept the copyright regime to begin with, so then already to think of a license is absurd. So there's many paradoxes and contradictions in these discussions that are embraced, that are really part of the festival. So it's not at all about solving them. And I think it is we enjoy for a few years now the conversations with this group that is very actively thinking with these contradictions.
Yeah, so I forgot about it. Okay. So there is also a question of let's not make it too. Yeah, so I forgot about it. Okay. So there is also a question of let's not make it too complicated. There has to be a license. Some of the films are put online, so they need a license, but not all the. And they, I think. So there is also a question of. Let's not make it too complicated. There has to be a license. Some of the films are put online, so they need a license, but not all the. And they, I think they go under some kind of Creative Commons variation.
CC0.
Yeah, CC0. They are distributed via PeerTube, but not all films. I mean, if you encounter them online, it's probably only a tiny quantity. The idea came. But I'm not sure if that's to make a hallucinating retro license after the last festival, which basically means that because there was no license for those films who were locally available, only for the people who had already said, yes, you can distribute them online, they had agreed on a license. But it would be great, again, a license can also be a place where you read about practice. And so in the discussions with Rebecca and Joachim, who were part of the 2019 team, there was this idea arising to retro license the films in order to understand what are everybody's ideas and what are the desires and the expectations and the fantasies around filmmaking that are present in the group of filmmakers who take part in the festival. So the hallucinating refers to the huge amounts of varieties and differences and possibilities. And the retro license is a probably legally not very well working license, which is more an attempt to describe than to prescribe. So we did a couple of days ago we did an interview with Joachim and Rebecca to understand, to talk about this and also to put some stuff on paper, because it's always very flu. The talk is like very nice, but it doesn't come. So we were thinking like, okay, let's write it up now. So we're busy making a document out of that, something written. So this is a quote, maybe we can read it from that interview that we did.
So this is Joachim speaking. Filmmakers who come to the festival, they have dreams of their ideal situation in which they want their films projected. The desires are very diverse. Like Rebecca mentioned, some want to be present in the projection, so that's a condition then. Like, I want my film to be shared, but then I want to be present. There are practices around celluloid that demands that films are shown on celluloid, so no digital projection, for example. There are people who are happy their films are shown and who agree that the rights situation is not perfect, but they might be more worried about the context in which their work might appear. So not so much about if, but in what context. People might be afraid that a film about an African sculptor or a film about a young girl end up in racist, machist, or pedophile contexts. So yeah, it's sensitive, of course, where they... context turned wrong in such a way that it's completely not according to the political views of the cinematographer. So the Hallucinating retro license is taking the idea of modularity from the Creative Commons license. We were thinking to start from the experience of the Cinema Sauvage version 2019 to collect an enormous quantity of desires that come from the practice, to create a modular license with many, many details. So in a way, like by asking people what kind of conditions they want for their films to be distributed under, they were also thinking, they're also trying to think of a license that then becomes a proposition that you can choose from. So it's a sort of generative modularity. So we started to fantasize, to have fun with it. What if a maker only wants to show the film to an audience of 12 persons, so not 11 and not 13? What I liked is that it starts in the practice and it could serve other festivals, be it Sauvage or another festival. We used it like an invitation to reflect and to open up a practice.
To reflect upon, or well, we need to do some more work on the text.
Right. Used it like an invitation to reflect and to open up a practice.
To reflect upon, or well, we need to do some more work on the text.
Right. That's okay. It's the transcript is in. We go from French to English in one go, so we're sometimes
as Dutch speakers.
As Dutch speakers, so sometimes a bit fast. But what is very interesting for us is that they are using maybe even more explicitly than in Constance's environment. They're using the license not as solving a problem, but really as an interface, as a space to think. So to end, we wanted to open up to this idea of licenses as transformative interfaces. And we would like to do that with a quote from our friend and companion from Barcelona, who is trying to think about this, the the way that these dull documents like licenses or conditions or codes of conduct are actually a way to open up possibilities. And so we want to end with that.
Shall I read it?
Yeah.
This is how we can maybe understand grey matter or grey literature, a spot from where you can turn the very probable into quite possible. This is where things can be altered. Precisely because this is the place where things can be written down, where things start tracing the two probable trajectories of the contemporary structuring of matter and can be somehow partly rewritten and changed from the probable to the possible in an instant. This at least is where the probable and possible blur. They are both there. This is the space-time of transformation. So that's by Rocha.
Voilà, that was it. Thank you very much.
Well, okay, so the first one is the link to the website of Constant. If you want to know more about Constant, then it's VZW. The one is the link to the website of Constant. If you want to know more about Constant, then it's VZW. That means association without. Know more about Constant, then it's VZW. That means association without a commercial. I don't know what. What is that? Yeah, AIM. Yeah. And the other one is the link where you find the script for this presentation. So it includes also the text.
And links to things.
And some of the links, yeah. And it's a great script to use for any presentation.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Yes, you can hear me. That's always good. So, yeah.
Well, hello. Maybe Peter and Fenke, maybe you can come back to the chat, to the video chat. A ver. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes, I cannot hear you. Maybe you are mute.
Yes. I have a noise.
Okay, now it's okay. Now it's okay.
Huh?
Yeah. So thanks for the presentation. That is very interesting. I have some small questions, but what the first one is I am curious to know how many is working in Constant. How many people?
That depends on how you count, but it's the equivalent of 3 full-time people, but split over 7, 8 people. So
8 people.
Yes, and then so that's the people that are in the let's say the core, the nucleus, as we say. So they take care of the daily work in Constant. But then there's lots of people around us that temporarily work with us, or and sometimes they're just only for a next period or for years and years. So yeah, it's quite a extensive gang after 20 years of, or 25 years of course.
Yeah, very nice. Well, I know that you have some kind of updating about this license, because I mean, maybe you can explain a little bit more over the video that we have seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what we were talking about a little while ago was, in a way, in the middle of trying to rethink our relation to these licenses. And so in the meantime, we're attempting to write a new license. This came up as part of, I mean, it became necessary as in a work session we organized in March or June. I know my time is a bit weird in these last months. Anyway, before the summer, which was called Unbound Libraries, and so a group of people came together to try and think about knowledge structures and infrastructures in relation to large collections of materials. And in order to release that material, we actually need a license. And so we started thinking about how to make an experiment with another license than the default license that Constant applies. So Constant has, since I think 10 years, always applied the free art license. So it's a default license that all the material that's produced in the context of Constant falls under. And we felt, rereading that license, that we wanted to make a new version. So at the moment there's discussions and writing sessions going on in trying to adjust the free art license to something that we would like to apply now. So it's not finished yet, and it brings up many questions and problems, but it's an active work at the moment.
Okay. And well, I also wanted to ask you, for example, with the Savage film, this licensing that you, well, the filmmakers were thinking about. The thing is like this. You could record or take the hard drive and then copy it, but and this is okay because in the end it's like you are actually you know exactly to whom you are giving your copyright, let's say, no, because it's like a reduced context, let's say, or a reduced group of people. But of course all these problems, it becomes much bigger when it's on internet. So
Yeah, bigger or smaller in a way. So what would you want to ask?
well, the question is like once you, for example, decide to use any of the license that you have been talking about, no, like the colonial or the feminist or only women or in the context, or actually, how can you be sure that it's going to be used in the right way? You know, because you don't know. This is the which kind of mechanism do the artists have to make it real? Because otherwise, it is a little bit of. I mean, it's just like a fantasy, let's say, which is a shame because it's something very important, no, for artists and for every one of us. So, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a problem, no? Like it's a very well-known problem. If people don't read the terms, they can do whatever they like. If they don't read the license, they can, of course, not abide to it. But that's.
I mean, the issue for the issue, like one of the issues we struggle with right now with the license fee agreement we have of a license that is more relational than individual, is that, I mean, licenses like the free art license are legally sane, so they can be contested in court, and they have been contested in court. So the current legal system does protect free licensed materials. I mean, the fact that it theoretical can is not, of course, not the same as that you can also claim your rights or even know when the rights are violated or like material is reclaimed. The thing is, of course, then like the only mechanism to defend the fantasy, so the idea of how you would like to do authorship differently, depends on a set of laws that actually is very problematic, and we would like to. This is actually what we fantasize about, that these laws would have a different ideology, and this is a problem that that bites in its own tail, and so that's a bit difficult to come out of. So yes. Fantasies is actually not so weird at the moment. It's actually maybe a good tool to rethink what it means to be an author these days, and what you want that to be, and what what you want to protect and what you want to care for, and what you can let go of. So.
In the case of the Cinema Sauvage license, it's actually very interesting that people do not care about the license.
No.
So it would be a license that you don't even have to read, because if we want to promote wild or savage use of the film, then so there's already a contradiction in itself, of course. It's a bit the play with the trying to write something down which is impossible, and then but like you say, I mean, it is true that if those films are going to be distributed online, then that's a more complicated situation.
Yes, I see. I mean, there's a problem there, no? Because I mean, it's very good. I like very much your work on this sense, that is actually taking this as a way of thinking, as a proposal. No?
Exactly. It's the writing is the thinking, it's the doing, because actually they already take the decision to not put everything online. It's very clear. They don't want that. But there are copies floating around everywhere. I know schools where they have in the library a disc with the films, but they're just not put online. So
that's one way of dealing with it. I mean, our thinking right now is more in the sense of to not go through defense mechanisms, but actually to call for other sensibilities about authorship, and so to somehow try to talk to people we know, but also people we don't know, about the collective conditions for authorship. So understanding that authorship is not just something from me to you as an audience, it's something that we care for together. It's already a common before we decide to release things. So how would you do that? How would you release something in a way that not just gives you a license to use, but it's also a license to think. And so that's But I mean, we don't have solutions. I think when we spoke the last time, we thought we would that it would be easier to somehow make that explicit, and the conversation is a bit more. So it's also interesting. More thinking needs to be done.
Yeah, sure, for sure. When I think we don't have any question in the chat, so maybe we can leave it here. Yes. Thank you very much for coming again and for being with Piksel this time. I hope we will work again together soon.
Yes, it's ongoing. It's not finished. So that's good. So we have a reason to speak again.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Bye, Maite. Thank you for hosting this.